welcome Heather. There you go. Indeed it is. Um, Brilliant to be here tonight. Thank you all for attending. Many of you will know Heather and Wild Intrigue. Some of you won't. Not all of you will have known the story of Wild Intrigue from the very beginning. So we're all looking forward to hearing how it started and potentially what exciting ideas Heather, Kane, and Phil have for the future of the kick. As somebody who chairs the Ousburn farm, it's great to see the work that's been going on in the Ousburn, and great to have Wild Intrigue based down there. So I think without further ado, we will let Heather tell her own story, and we'll sit back and listen and look forward to hearing all about it. Thank you, Heather.
Great. Thank you, Ian. Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining me tonight. I can't see your lovely faces, but I look forward to seeing them at the end for a Q&A. So yeah, I'm Heather Devi. I'm co-director of Wild Intrigue. We're a community interest company, so a not-for-profit based in Ousburn in Newcastle. But as you'll see, we do stuff across all of Northern England, and that's where we like it to be. So I'll just kick off. The best way to describe Wild Intrigue is actually something we get asked a lot, particularly by kids, but also by adults. And that's when we kind of take them into Kielder Forest and they say, will we see a bear today? Will we see a wolf? And to me, it's just a bit of a reflection of that kind of enchantment that we all have within us about nature in Britain. Obviously, we don't have bears, we don't have wolves anymore, but deep down in our core, we still kind of have this belief that they are roaming in the countryside. And it's that kind of enchantment for nature that 10 years ago inspired me to set Wild Intrigue up. So I was working as an ecological consultant at the time. I found my soul was being quite severely diminished through that particular job. And I was seeing a lot of habitats being destroyed, a lot of wildlife being relocated essentially at my hands. And I thought, well, I'll quit, but what is it that I do want to do? And I wanted to inspire people. I wanted to educate them about wildlife. And I wanted to do that to rewild them. And in order to achieve the rewilding of places, I feel that you need to kind of rewild people as well. And I know that between the group, there might be different concepts of what that word means. But to me, it's just kind of reinvigorating the landscape and bringing natural processes back. So yeah, that was 10 years ago. And initially we started working with children in schools. I set up a Wildcat Warriors group. And it just kind of merged and blended and took its own rhythm, I suppose. And I just kind of wanted to see what would evolve out of it naturally. So initially, we would take people on these rewilding experiences. And when I say we, my partner Kane joined me on this little mission to begin with, and he's still obviously a massive part of Wild Intrigue today. So initially we would take people off onto expeditions, and these were multi-night experiences in wild parts or wilder parts of Britain. So this is a group on the Isle of Carna off the west coast of Scotland. We did camera trap surveys. We trained them in moth trapping, bat detecting. We did some aquatic surveys, and here one of the groups holding a big species list that we got from the weekend. And it was really lovely, and people really did hook on to these experiences, and you know, I enjoyed them myself, which is always good fun. But what we realized with those is that the people who were booking on to attend were already kind of on that journey into learning about wildlife. And maybe there were students. This is actually a student group from the University of Cumbria. We had some professional ecologists join us on other excursions into Northumberland. But we wanted to engage people who might not think of nature as kind of a fun thing to do or an exciting thing to do. You know, you go to the cinema for a night out. You might go for a meal, for something different to do with your family. And we thought, well, what can we do? How can we hook people into our lovely countryside to share the wild spaces with them? We thought, well, what does everybody love? What is it? And obviously it's pizza, isn't it? Who doesn't love pizza? So this was the first, what we called mini exped with Wild Intrigue. It was sort of like a bite of wildness in people's weeks. And we thought, well, we can get people out, create their own pizzas. It's a lovely thing to actually eat food with new people and to create that food, especially if it's al fresco outside. So we thought, well, we'll do that and we'll host Bats and Pizza Nights. So Bats and Pizza Nights were our very first mini exped that we hosted. I think 2016 was the first one. And we hosted these at Wild Northumbrian near Greenhoff. We still do these to this day. They've been compared to being as hard to get tickets for as Santa on the rooftop at Phoenix. So a really nice event that we get families coming back to each year. They've really kind of made it a bit of a family tradition, which is just so lovely. So we do family nights and sort of adult nights for if you want a night away from the kids and it's a nice relaxed environment. You come and make your pizzas, cook them in a stone-baked pizza oven. You go for a walk around the site, learning about the ecology of the area, some of the green corridors that run through along that part of Tarset. And then finally, after a campfire and marshmallows, of course, you go on a bat safari. And this is the key part of it, really. So we hook people in with food and drink, and then we make sure that they're getting that education and that inspiration that's the core of Wild Intrigue, and just rewilding their senses a little bit. A lot of people don't actually realise that we have bats in Britain, so that they're always quite amazed. And we have this thing at Wild Intrigue where we want to get people's shiny-eyed excitement. We want to get that spark for nature. And Bats and Pizza Nights are often the first part of that journey for people who are still taking that journey with Wild Intrigue today. So that was the first mini exped that we had. And a big part of what we do is showing or demonstrating that there's a nature-based economy in the north of England. So all of the team are from Northern England. We're proud Northeasterners. And we've acknowledged, working with wildlife across our time, essentially, that Scotland gets a lot of good reputation for nature and wildlife experiences. The south of England similarly does, but in the north, it's been a little bit left out in that sense, in particular in the northeast. So we're self-sustained. Our business model is that, and it's always been, that we make our money through these experiences where people get something out of it, but so do we. So that now funds our staff, our very, very small team of staff. But being a not-for-profit, we pay a percentage to any host site that we work with, any partner as well, because without them, we wouldn't have the nature, we wouldn't have the produce. And any profits get pumped back into the wildlife that we're working with on that hyper-local scale. So Wild Northumbrian, for example, where we do the Bats and Pizza Nights, there's not that many opportunities for bats to roost. Previously, they've roosted in the church there, but they've kind of changed how they run that. So bats are roosting there, but they need new opportunities. So we installed bat boxes with the profits remaining from 1 year of our Bats and Pizza Nights, for example. But in Britain, I think because we don't have wolves, because we don't have bears, we don't have lynx, our wildlife's not seen as particularly sexy. And we've taken part in a Rewilding Europe training course for ecotourism providers. And throughout the entire course, they were talking about elk and experiences you can have with vultures and wolves and all these incredible creatures. And then we thought back of what we actually host experiences with, and it's the little things. It's the bats, it's the moths, it's the frogs, but they're no less exciting. It's all about kind of how you package it. And just tell this kid here, he's holding a poplar hawk moth on the end of his finger, the most magical little creatures you can get in your moth trap. And they pop up around a lot of rural places, but also urban places. And it's an immediate spark of shiny-eyed excitement that you get when you open those moth traps up. So this is actually from a Moths and Muffins experience. We never get so many people on these, but we always blame the muffins because muffins aren't that much of a hook, we've found. It's not the moths. Because look at that, a garden tiger moth. We get these particularly in areas where, I don't like the word weed, but they're attracted to a lot of weeds for their plant sources. And of course, the tidier we're getting, we're losing a lot of these particular species now in our gardens, but in rural places. So opening your moth trap and seeing this flash of orange is just the most exciting thing. Beautiful golden Y as well. Again, relatively common, the golden Y, but look at those iridescent gold flecks and that pinky, dusky tinge that they get, beautiful fur coats that they're wearing. And of course, the peppered moths that many of us learned about in school. And again, we can teach people, we can educate people through the peppered moth and other moths. So they changed their coloration during the Industrial Revolution to a darker form. And now that the air's cleaning up a bit, you get lighter forms, but you do still get dark forms in areas where there is that kind of industrial pollution. So there's fascinating stories to be told in the micro creatures that we have in Northern England. Just as an example of how exciting moths are, you might not be familiar with him, but there's this brilliant actor called Nick Offerman. He's in things called like Parks and Recreation and all these amazing things. He's an LA actor. As a very random story, we were doing some moth trapping for a farmer called James Rebanks in the Lake District. He's a Herdwick sheep breeder, and he's been re-wetting a lot of his land. So he was interested to see how the wildlife was responding. We did some moth trapping, and he knows Nick Offerman. So Nick turned up, and he got hooked on the canary moths that we were capturing. And a year later, it turned out that he'd written all about them in his new book. So he's gone from these incredible American stories of wilderness down to a little tiny farm in the Lake District and the beauty of moths in this book. And it just demonstrates how one interaction with something that we might otherwise pass off as being a bit dull, really, can really spark someone's imagination for connecting with the natural world, LA actors included. But it's not just amazing wildlife we have in the north. As you guys know, we've got the most wonderful people. So at Wild Intrigue, we like to celebrate the wildlife, but also the people that are part of that story. So this is First and Last Brewery, based in Bellingham. Wonderful team. They moved in, well, not too recently, actually, about 3 years ago now, I think, into an old fire station in Bellingham from their base in Elsdon previously. And they've got a sustainable microbrewery there, family owned. They forage all of their own ingredients where possible, and they're kind of connected with our ethos. So we linked up together to share their story and to share the story of wildlife in Bellingham, and created Bats and Beers. So bats rely on the bounty of botany in Northumberland because bats are insectivores. The insects need the botany to feed off. And First and Last need the botany for their incredible brews, of course. So it's just, again, part of telling that story of if we have wonderful landscapes in Northumberland, we can have this incredible sustainable produce as well. But we need to add to that bounty of nature. So Spirit of the Wild is an experience that we've linked with Heppel Wilds to talk about nature restoration on a landscape scale. So changing grazing animals and everything that Heppel are doing. If you'd like to learn more, please do book onto a Spirit of the Wild experience. And we link up with Walter and Mary based at Heppel to tell that story, to take people on a short kind of walking safari around the estate. And then they get to taste the landscape through Heppel Gin, of course, Heppel Spirits. So it again connects with people because our olfaction, our taste and our scent is such a strong memory that we hold. So if you combine kind of food and drink into these things, people really like hook onto that experience itself. It's a really great way for them to remember the stories that are being told. But we don't shy away from the kind of difficult subjects as well. For example, the Cheviot goats, these incredible connections to our sort of, well, what's thought our Neolithic history and our cultural heritage, something that we do desperately want to conserve and maintain. But similarly, we want to look ahead to the future and consider the grazing impacts that they might have on the hills. The more that they nibble down onto those lovely herbaceous plants, the less restoration we'll have and the less biodiversity we'll have. So Goats and Gourmet has been a really great way to work with the Cheviot Goat Management Group and talk about these issues with people who pay to come on the experiences and provide a really cool experience as well up in the College Valley. So you might recognise this fella. This is Chris from Fell's Kitchen. He was recently on, what is he called? Tales with Robson Green. Kane's lurking in the corner there. Yeah, Robson Green's Weekend Escapes, that's the one. Chris was recently on that for his business that he set up during COVID. So again, we really like Chris's philosophy. He likes to take people outside and create them beautiful gourmet meals. And we thought, well, we'll link up. It's really important to us that we link up with people with similar philosophies. So we are a little bit picky in that sense. But look at that. Oh, he serves up the most gorgeous things. Brings a little campfire. He brings desserts as well. It's 2 course. So once we've walked up the hill, explored all the other wildlife, we talk about the goats, then we sit down with a lovely view and enjoy the meal. And again, it's just a lovely way to spend the day and get some inspiration, get some education and rewild yourself. And there is Kane. But, we do have magnificent wildlife as well, and it's really enigmatic of the area. So the Kielder ospreys in particular, such an incredible conservation success story over the years. There are now around 7 nesting pairs around the Kielder Reservoir itself. Last year, admittedly, they didn't do very well because of such a wet and windy spring that we had. But it's such an incredible conservation success story. So we host these osprey watching cruises in partnership with Kielder Waterside, just to talk about the fact that we do have wonderful wildlife in the forests. It might not be bears and it might not be wolves, but we do have these wonderful things seasonally to come and see. So we are quite interested to work closer with Forestry England and Northumbrian Water to really showcase that, so that when you go in the forest, you can't get away from wildlife signage. We do a lot of kind of traveling to learn about how other countries do this. And the Biesbosch National Park in the Netherlands is a prime example. You can't go anywhere without wildlife signage about the species you're going to go and bump into. But Kielder Forest, I don't think it's quite reached that just yet. So we do have a long way to go just to simply tell people that we have wildlife here. So these are twice weekly cruises that we host between April to September when the ospreys are here. And now they're currently in West Africa, the lucky things. So we're looking forward to those coming back. So yeah, lovely, lovely opportunity to go on the osprey boat and watch them. Wild Haweswater is a bit of a kind of case study site for us. So if you're not familiar with Wild Haweswater, it's based in the Lake District National Park, quite close to Penrith. So it's on the Eastern Fells. And we linked up with them to set up the very first commercial wildlife photography hides on an RSPB reserve. So this that you can see is the Woodland Wildlife Hide. It's based in the stunning Nadal Forest, which is ancient Atlantic oak wood. It's just on the edge of it. So we get red squirrels, pied flycatcher, redstart, great spotted woodpecker, green woodpecker, badgers, all sorts of beautiful things. And the purpose of this was, again, to demonstrate the abundance of wildlife in this natural setting, but to do so in a low impact way. So these are kind of high value, low impact experiences. This hide here seats 2 people. It's all decked out, all lovely inside. But we've diversified the use of the hide as well. So we host breakfast with red squirrels experiences, afternoon tea in the woodland hide. People can book it for full day or half day photography hire. So even with this one tiny structure, you can kind of diversify your operation and make the most of it and attract a variety of audiences to experience the wildlife. Breakfast with red squirrels, always like hotcakes. It just goes straight away. I did actually invite John Craven onto that once. It was on BBC Countryfile, and I can tell you he's the most impatient man when waiting for red squirrels that we've ever had. We did get them, but he didn't like to wait. So yeah, we work with the RSPB for that. Wild Haweswater is a partnership between the RSPB and the water company United Utilities, and they're trying to show that there's a sustainable catchment-wide approach to water quality improvements. So they've re-wiggled Swindale Beck in the stunning Swindale Valley. They're restoring a lot of their upland vegetation through reduced grazing and planting. So it just helps to create that kind of filtration from the source into the reservoir, essentially. So it's a really lovely team to work with. So we've got the woodland wildlife hide. We have a pied flycatcher hide, which is seasonal. We've got the experiences, and we're developing a new reflection pool hide now. And all of that, basically, we've been doing that, I think, I've lost track now, I think maybe 5-6 years, potentially. We're trying to show with Wild Haweswater that there's a nature-based economy in the Lake District National Park. So Wild Haweswater does have a farm enterprise within it, but because it's going through nature restoration, they're trying to show that there are methods of income that don't rely on subsidies or external payments. So we're just one kind of contribution to that. So we've linked up with as many kind of organisations in the immediate surrounding area as possible to spread that benefit out. So the Mardale Inn is a community-owned pub. We linked up with them so that our attendees could get a discount on the B&B, and therefore, obviously, our attendees extend their stay in the area and spend more. And similarly, with afternoon tea in the Woodland Hide, we've linked up with the shop just down the road, and they provide the afternoon teas, so they get payment from it as well. So it's a really great case study, that, and if you'd like to know more, I'm very happy to share. But because it's a trek, obviously, from Newcastle, we have a local guide, so we've employed someone locally to host these experiences. Whew, take a breather. Right, so if we want more nature and we want to expand on this nature-based economy, we can't do all of the work ourselves. So restoring keystone species is key to this, and doing it in a strategic way that is very community focused and community involved. So I'm a beaver ecologist. Wild Intrigue's worked with beavers for about 10 years, but I go into communities such as Wild Ennerdale here in the Lake District, when they're in those early stages of thinking of restoring beavers, to start those discussions. So we haven't lived with beavers for around 400 years, up until, the previous 20 years or so. So we've got a lot of reacquainting to do. They've been lost in our cultural memory quite a lot. We've got a few inaccuracies that have been bled down thanks to C.S. Lewis, for example, telling us that beavers eat fish when in fact they are entirely herbivorous. So we go in and speak to communities to just, again, get them started on that journey so that they can learn more. I was the Cumbria Beaver Project officer, so I did a lot of my own kind of media. And what was great, actually, that role unfortunately hit during COVID. So I was able to take it online and reached tens of thousands of people because everyone was stuck in. I actually managed to speak to so many people. So like we are tonight, these online methods of talking to one another are really great as well. We create films. So this is a series we made for the Beaver Trust on beavers, which you can access on YouTube if you're interested. But most excitingly, finally, we're able to take people out into Northumberland to show them a beaver wetland, thanks to the National Trust at Wallington. So the National Trust restored beavers in July 2023. And since then, they've made an incredible wetland. You'll have to come and see it. So that was thanks to funding through the Reese Foundation. And the Beaver Trust brought the beavers. So we were brought in because we have expertise in beaver ecology to show people around, again, with paid tickets to help with that nature-based economy model and show them what the beavers have been up to. So I was actually in there the other day. It was freezing. I was in there the other day. You might just be able to see a big bundle of sticks at the back there. That's their lodge. They've increased the height of their lodge. They've extended their dams, and they're extending their wetland quite a bit at the moment. So you are very welcome to come and find out more about that. An important aspect, a vital aspect of what we do is to not keep our thinking insular in the areas that we work, but to kind of cross-pollinate from rural into urban, from Europe into Britain. So this is, for example, a beaver wetland that I visited in Kelheim in Bavaria, to show that you can have really high value agricultural land with a beaver wetland in amongst it. And the farmers are essentially working with the local government to allow that to happen through Beaver Project Officer provision. And everywhere we go, particularly in rural places, in urban places in Europe, we always love to come back to our base. So this is Oosburn, and this is where I'm sat right now in my very, very cold office. So this is Oosburn, and we're just enchanted by this place because it feels so different. It's part of the Oosburn Wildlife Enhancement Corridor, which essentially connects greenery from Gateshead's edge all the way up into the rural parts of Newcastle's edge into Northumberland. So it's this key area for wildlife passage. And we got hooked really just by looking and listening and walking through the landscape. So bats, I'm a bit of a bat lady. I first noticed how many bats were flitting around the area. And again, that's quite an unusual thing to see in such a built-up environment. So we got hooked on the place and started Oosburn bat safaris. The first kind of urban safaris that we did were the Oosburn bat safaris here. And it's such a contrast, you know, when you go from Goats and Gourmet in the College Valley to Oosburn bat safaris, where you might get this sort of, you get random reggae parties setting off in the woods and all kinds of stuff going on. But regardless, you've got this rich abundance of wildlife. And key to that, you've got the city of Newcastle and the city of Gateshead that can just come out, step out on an evening and immerse themselves in wildness, get some inspiration, get some education, and rewild themselves. The birdsong here is quite spectacular. We do a lot of work in Gateshead, and even compared to Gateshead, admittedly, Oosburn is just absolutely pumping with birdsong. So before I came in here, we had song thrush singing outside, just reaffirming his territory. There's all sorts. This is a blackbird, a male blackbird. And the scrub and the woodland and those kind of green connections that we have in Ouseburn are core to that. So we started dawn chorus discos. This is Kane here holding a parabolic dish, and the attendees, you can see, have wireless headphones on, so silent disco headphones that flash up whenever birds sing. So parabolic dishes bring sounds 10 times closer to you. So during the dawn chorus, obviously it's a beautiful symphony where all of the birds join together, but this allows us to pinpoint on the individual songs of each bird. And in doing so, people are really able to appreciate the individual songsters that take part in that and learn about their ecology. And it looks proper cool. And you get Ouseburn all to yourself when you're up at 5 a.m. doing a dawn chorus disco. It's worth it though, I promise. So those kinds of experiences, this is a dawn chorus disco again underneath the viaduct. These kinds of experiences have enabled us over the past 7 to 8 years to just slowly integrate with the community and start talking about just how valuable the wildlife is here. Ousburn's really well known for its arts and its food and its farm, of course, and it's various cultures like that. But when it comes to wildlife, it hasn't really got the recognition it deserves because it's proper class. So we set up the Wild Haweswater project last January. It's just finished its first year. So that was essentially our way to kind of formalize the wildlife recording effort and celebration effort as well of wildlife in the lower Ouseburn Valley. And it's a really intriguing place because it connects with the Tyne. So the Ouse burn on this section, the burn itself, is tidal. So every day you get these new interactions on low tide with wildlife and at high tide. So throughout the core, really, you've got this ever-changing landscape on the burn. And then you've got green edges leading into the woodland as well. But amongst that, you've got such different communities too. So the way we've established it is setting up like basic models of how people can get involved, but then being incredibly flexible with it so that different communities can get involved on their own terms. And thankfully, the funders, so we've got funding from Rewilding Britain, the Northumbrian Water Branch Out Fund, and Northumberland Tyneside Bird Club, and a community crowdfunder. Thankfully, the funders were accepting of that flexibility, which can put a lot of projects off sometimes, but that was really helpful. The day after we launched, this otter popped up just outside the Tyne Bar with a cub. And we thought, right, well, if there's ever proof that a wildlife project is wanted in Ouseburn, there, we've got it. And this was taken by one of the residents, Will Howe. So we set up a little WhatsApp group for Wild Ouseburn so people can look at the wildlife sightings. We put the otter in straight away, and Will was able to run out of his house with his camera and get this picture. So it's been really interactive and really lovely. Just as an indication, this is the general project area. It's actually a smaller area that we're working in than the average Northumberland farm. But because it's obviously so urbanized and there's so many people, the opportunities for engagement here have been incredible. But the amount of wildlife as well it might be quite surprising to you. So we've undertaken a lot of, and we're continuing a lot of standardized surveys, wildlife surveys, to understand what's here so that it can be replicated year on year, and then we have that comparative data. So this here is a wetland bird survey on the burn. You can see a family of mute swans moving through. We've done a common bird census, which is essentially territory mapping of birds in the area, or it's the royal we that Kane did that entirely. Bat surveys as well to understand bat activity patterns, how they move and navigate and feed through the landscape. a lot of different standardized surveys have begun this year and will be continuing throughout the year. So wetland bird survey, for example, we've been able to better understand the kind of movement of kingfishers. We know that they spend winter here primarily, and we tend to get one or two, but they move through. It's an important passage route for them. Grey wagtails, stunning things. We had those nest this year in an old industrial sort of drainage pipe. And again, we know that because they're nesting, there's enough food in the burn for them to be eating and on the edges. So fingers crossed they nest again this coming year. And community participation has exceeded what we ever imagined for this first year. So for example, we have an iNaturalist project. You can see here that there's 600 identifiers thereabouts. You can see all the little dots at the bottom as well. You can actually access this project online. Just type in iNaturalist and then search for wild ooseburn. And over 4,000 observations just in this first year. So the amount of data that we're collecting is just incredible. So this data is fed into biological record centres, which developers tend to go to before development. So now wild ooseburn is kind of directly contributing to a strategic landscape plan for ooseburn. So how we envisage green spaces will be in the future, but also grey spaces. How can we make future grey spaces, future developments better for wildlife? And it's informed through the project. We've done a nest box scheme throughout the project area, which is part of a BTO breeding bird survey. You can see a little blue tit getting ringed here. So we've linked with Andy Reichard from the Northumberland bird ringing group. We've done some moth trapping. This was quite an interesting one, actually, because if you've been in Ooseburn on an evening, it can get quite dark in the woods, which is great for wildlife. But as you can see in the background, the graffiti there, you get some intriguing interactions. And moth traps have these incredibly vibrant purple lights. So we had the moth traps set out, and people would kind of start walking down the path and just think, oh, I think it might actually go around the other way. So what we've realized is we might need to put, a bit more notice out and say, come on over, come and find out about the moths. Please don't run away again. But this is a swallowtail moth. Beautiful thing that we have in Ooseburn. And again, something that people might not ever imagine we would have here. We've done loads this past year, and I realized that actually by pulling this talk together that we've, as a community, we've managed to achieve a lot. We did an Ooseburn Dark Skies weekend in March last year, where we linked up with Northumberland National Park and a local artist called Bethan Maddox. We had a beautiful installation of Noctalgia that was at the Sill you might have visited, and because Bethan's based in Ooseburn, we managed to get it as part of this weekend, which was really exciting. And it was just a lovely way to talk about the beautiful side of Ooseburn at night. There's a lot of fear amongst people here about walking through the woods on an evening, particularly with women, or even just walking along the burn. So we hosted evening walks where we saw the full moon in all its glory. We saw otters on the burn, actually, which was very fortuitous. So again, just rebranding, I suppose, rebranding the area at night, that it is beautiful and it's worth going out into, and it can be safe. The most successful project, I suppose, mini project as part of Wild Haweswater that is still underway currently is the sand martins. So a couple of years ago, sand martins, if you're not familiar, they usually create little holes, little nest chambers in natural riverbanks. So you tend to get them on areas which haven't been canalised away from urban edges. A couple of years ago, myself and Kane were walking between the Cycle Hub and the Free Trade Inn, if you're familiar with the area. There's this big sandstone wall. And we saw these birds flitting around. And it turned out to be sand martins. And they ended up nesting in these little holes in the sandstone wall. You can see here, the one that's flying in, it's actually got a ring on it. So we're really keen this year to find out more about their kind of where they've come from, whether they might have been urban and they've moved into a new urban spot from elsewhere. But with them turning up and just, the magic of sand martins turning up on the edge of the Ouseburn, we got the community involved and undertook a sand martin survey to find out how many holes were occupied by the sand martins and whether they'd reared chicks. And it turned out they'd been very busy. So this past year, because sand martins are colonial, they like to nest as a really large group. We thought, well, how about getting an artificial sand martin bank as well? You never know what's going to happen with, urban structures like this. But also, just to add to that colonial behaviour, it's a good idea to get an additional nesting resource for them. So we worked with a small, large but small area of land and the landowner near the Cycle Hub to establish a campaign to install a sand martin bank. And we set up a crowdfunding platform, but with a bit of a difference. So the right-hand poster you can see here, this shows the sand martin bank, and each circle is a nesting chamber. So we had to sponsor a sand martin nest hole scheme where for 50 quid you could sponsor a hole, and then each year you get records and photos of any sand martins nesting in there, because we're working with Northumberland and Tyneside, Northumberland Ringing Group to ring them, because on the back of the sand martin bank you can actually access the chambers. So Andy Ricard again will be coming, and if any are nesting, he'll be able to put little rings on so we can monitor their movements and understand their movements better. But also the people who have got nest hole 5, if there's sand martins in there, they'll get a little story about them too, just to connect them that little bit more. And it exceeded, thankfully. So it completely exceeded the target. And I'm pleased to say that at the end of this month, apparently, it will be installed. So look out for some opportunities to come and have a look at that. And when the sand martins are back in the summer, come along for a free sand martin walk, and we can tell you all about the wildlife that we have here in Ouseburn too. So historically, Wild Intrigue has focused a lot on rural landscapes, and what we thought at the time, I suppose, were wilder landscapes. But being in the city here and seeing the wildness around us, along with the people, has really brought home just how valuable it is to people. So the Wild Haweswater project, for example, this lady here is called Brittany. In the past year, Brittany has decided to retrain from working with the NHS into a career in wildlife conservation. And there's little stories like this popping up everywhere. So there isn't just a nature-based economy and training potential in rural places in the northeast and the northwest. There is in the cities as well. People just, really need that opportunity to connect with it. So it's just really lovely to be based in Ouseburn and see that happening firsthand and supporting that journey, I suppose. Right, I'm pretty much there now, so you'll be glad to hear. So that's such a quick whistle-stop tour, essentially, and I've missed loads out what we do. But, within 45 minutes, I think I've done quite well, actually, whipping through that. So this year we've linked up with Northumbria University and Daniel Turner from the Tyne Kittiwake Partnership to work on a Navigating Urban Ecologies project focused on the Tyne Kittiwakes. You can look out for more on that. We're going to be launching some events and things soon. And that is essentially spatial mapping of the nesting kittiwakes, which nest on the Newcastle and Gateshead quayside. We've worked with them again for over 10 years now. So it's just going to be a really good chance to talk about their movements of this red listed species and how we can coexist with them in an urban environment, because they do very well on the quayside, but not so well elsewhere, unfortunately. The Tyne Derwent Way as well. So we're the nature leads on the Tyne Derwent Way, which is a 9-mile route essentially from the Glass House, which used to be called the Sage, in Gateshead, all the way along to Dunstan Staids, and then essentially along to National Trust Gibbside. So we're doing a lot of, again, habitat work, habitat restoration, improving it for nature, but also some experiences and community events through that too. So you can look out for that. And hopefully with all of this incredible natural restoration in the city and in urban areas, if kids ask me, what wildlife do we have here in the future, I might be able to say some even more intriguing species. Beavers would be nice in more areas. So thank you so much for listening. If you've got any questions, feel free to ask. But I'll stop sharing my screen now, I think, Annie. And then I can take questions.
Great. Thank you, Heather. Wow, I've been absolutely riveted. So much coverage of so many interesting points. And now is the point where people can ask their own questions. I'm just going to see what is in the chat. We've been keeping an eye on the chat while you've been talking. We've had a bit of a sort of a book recommendation thread going on, which has been lovely. Lots of lovely titles in the thread there. We've got a question. We had the first of the questions. There weren't too many questions in the chat thread, other than one asking for the from Giovanni asking for the name of the park in the Netherlands that you mentioned.
Yeah, that was, I never know how to say it right, but it's the Biesbosch National Park. I think it's Biebosch. And we actually get there, so we try not to fly. So we get the ferry from North Shields to Amsterdam, and then you get a train from Amsterdam to Rotterdam, and then I can't remember the little town, but you get another train there, and you can essentially walk in. But they also have the beaver bus in summer that you can get on from the local town. It's worth it.
Fantastic. We had comments from Ian saying, loving the fusion of Indigenous wildlife and local food. And then we had recommendations for books on rewilding and landscape scale nature recovery, for instance, Wild Fell, also Rooted by Sarah Langford. We also had a nice comment from Dan Avery, who said he'd been to a talk by Paul at Wallington, the countryside manager, and he was talking about the beaver escape. I think that was last summer now, wasn't it? And it had made it all the way to the River Reed in Otterburn, and it's now been recaptured. Naughty beaver. I hope it had a telling off before it was put back into the Wallington enclosure.
Well, actually, I'll just say on that actually. So that was Steve. So he's a mature male, and he kept escaping because he wants to find a lady friend. But because he's at that age, he's moved to a different enclosure now, elsewhere. So just in case there's questions about that.
Questions, anybody? I've invited you all to unmute.
Yeah. Heather, can I ask a quick, very specific Ousburn question? There's a floodgate, which obviously separates the Tyne from the Ousburn. I was told that it stopped working years ago. Is that a positive or a negative for the wildlife?
oh, it's a massive positive.
Right.
We love that it doesn't work.
No, that's okay.
Yeah,
And is it likely just to stay there as a bit of a strange Heath Robinson type monument?
it's looking that way actually. Yeah, because that tidal nature um, is such a great spot. We get fish coming in, so spent salmon on migration if they need a bit of a rest passage. It's the same with the otters. If they need rest, that's why they come in. And we get the mute swans nesting in there, and moorhen, and grey seals now and again at high tide coming to feed on the flatfish and cormorants. And if it was down, we wouldn't have any of that, and it wouldn't be nearly as interesting.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's good that it's broke.
Good. That's fine. Thank you. Please, other people ask questions.
Any other questions from anybody?
I haven't got a question, but I think the idea of I'm working in Morpeth, just doing little bits and pieces with one or two other people. But the idea of getting people involved with over food is a brilliant idea. You know, sort of, I was thinking buttercups and bakes for the meadow. You know, sort of love the idea of the words and see if we can gather a few people more people interested, because in a place like Morpeth, you know, there are spaces, but often they're manicured, and it's really nice to encourage places that are not manicured and to leave them to do their own thing in a way, but with a bit of intervention perhaps in the autumn to cut. But yeah. So a very interesting conversation, and certainly one I will pass on to ideas I'll pass on to other people. Thank you.
Thank you, Pat.
We've got a question in the chat box from Hannah. A question regarding future Wild Intrigue opportunities. What sort of events do you have coming up? Any interesting projects?
That's a good point. I'm trying to think of what new ones. We're actually going to be looking at tours, so like a slightly different branch. So on the northeast coast in particular, we work with the Northumberland Coast National Landscape quite closely. So we're quite keen to do kind of birding tours, full day things up that way. We'll be doing a lot more at Wild Haweswater as well, or our guide will, on photography experiences and training courses and the like. But more in the city, generally a lot more in the city. Parakeets, for example, are quite, obviously they're non-native and they're quite controversial, I suppose. But if you're ever going to Walker Park when they're at their winter roost, it's just the most incredible spectacle. So even things like that, to get that, you know, intriguing discussion going, we might look at some kind of parakeet watchers, but loads, especially if people keep coming up with things like, what was it, buttercups and bakes by Pat. We're always tempted to do more.
And we've got another comment about Ousburn being a fascinating place, not just for industrial archaeology, as well as wildlife.
Absolutely.
And urban nature. Any more questions from anybody? I've got a quick one, if I may. The Archers has got a beaver storyline at the moment. Do you get any little sort of eruptions of demand and interest in a specific thing because somebody's got a storyline running at the time, or something else on social media? You know, do you get sort of fashionable sudden bursts of interest?
Yeah, that's a good point, actually. Yeah, I mean, we're quite fortunate that beavers are quite a hot topic nationally. So there is quite a lot of interest in the beavers, as an example. Whereas previously, when I was Cumbria Beaver Project Officer, there weren't, that was a few years ago now, they weren't really spoken about. So it was proper hard graft to try and get people to engage about the species. Goats as well. People love a goat. So there's always a lot of kind of interest around walking up the mysterious hill to come and see the goats from Neolithic times. So yeah, the media can actually have a bit of an influence thinking about it. I've never really considered that. That's a good point.
I see there's a question there from Sarah Fellows. Are there any opportunities for starling murmuration evening?
Oh, this is something that I'd really love to do. It's just the most enchanting thing, isn't it? Great Park has an incredible starling murmuration that I think might be back. I mean, you can just go and see it, but it would be lovely to do a kind of experience around it as well. Oh, we have, yeah. Kane's reminding me, we've already thought musical murmurations. We were thinking of linking with like an acoustic band, Hector Gannett we work closely with in North Shields, an incredible band. So we're thinking of having like soft music while they were murmurating. Yeah, thanks for the reminder. We might do that.
You need a food stuff beginning with M though.
Marshmallows.
Marshmallows. That. Thanks, Pat. Jot it down.
David's just put a question on there.
Sorry.
Yeah. Any thoughts about lynx reintroduction? I know there's also been a report, I think, that only went public this week about 163 wolves would be the optimum amount for Scotland. So obviously apex creatures are being talked about a little bit more. Coming from a farming background, I know that just protests too much in terms of the farming community, but what's your thoughts?
Lynx, absolutely. I think what wolves, are a much bigger discussion. I mean, Scotland would be the place if anywhere, but the lynx, they are a more realistic and feasible species to get back. We do have way too many roe deer that need managing to help with that restoration. So lynx in Northumberland on the borders into Kielder, and you're probably aware of the it's gone out of my head now. The Lynx project, the Northumberland. Yes, that's the one. Missing lynx. But when it comes to things like the Cairngorms situation, where 4 were just dumped and unprepared, and the community was unprepared, that was just terrible. When they're captive like that, they don't know how to cope. But we do need lynx back, but as part of that bigger nature restoration discussion. So Haweswater is a really interesting example of that. They used to have golden eagles up until 2016. And they essentially vanished because the habitat wasn't right. So Haweswater is going from that floor up approach where they're restoring the fells to get bilberry and heather back, which is bringing red grouse back, which is a golden eagle food. So I kind of like that approach to work on an ecosystem level instead of just the apex predator level, for a long answer.
No, that's okay. And I guess the secondary would be the Rothbury estate. Now the wildlife trusts have committed to. There's talk about synergy there. There's a question just popped in from Dan on exactly that. So, have you volunteered to be involved in that? Are you hoping to be involved in that? What do you think the wildlife trusts will do with such a large piece of land?
Yeah, it's an incredible opportunity. I'm not very familiar with the project myself, to be honest. We haven't been sort of engaged with it. But what is great about that area of land is that it'll kind of connect Wilder Wallington with sort of Heppel Wilds, and it will create that much larger landscape to look at landscape scale restoration. And then you can start talking about species like beaver, wild living beaver, and maybe even in the future, 50 years down the line, you could look at lynx when there's more restoration and suitability for them. It would be lovely to get involved, but we haven't really engaged with it.
I guess some people were disappointed the rumour Brian May was going to buy it was just a false rumour, but there you go. The Badgers would have cheered up if he successfully bought it. Anybody else wanted to ask questions? I'm not sure if everybody can unmute themselves, or Annie, whether you need to, but
I've invited everybody to unmute themselves if they wish to.
So
if we haven't got any other questions, we can.
Well, you're always welcome to email us, or we're based at 51 Lime Street in Ousburn. We share the office space with the Ousburn Trust, so you can come by for a coffee or something.
I can vouch. I walked past late the other night, and you were still working away there. So,
as I am tonight.
indeed, I'm just sorry they can't afford heating. That's awful.
Yeah.
Yeah. But if there's no further questions, Heather and Kane as well, absolutely fantastic talk. I hadn't realized quite the intricacy and just the common sense of it all. And somebody who loves the environment and loves artisan food. I've got a few friends and I'm thinking I need to take them out. What on earth shall I do? And I think tonight has certainly solved that problem. So
We do gift vouchers.
absolutely. Well, that's really good to know. They're absolutely fantastic. It's great that we've recorded it so people who couldn't attend tonight can see it. And I'm sure if we're in a room, we'd all be clapping loudly. But if we could just say thank you so much for your time and all the effort you put in. And looking forward to the next 10 years and seeing you grow, thrive, and helping the people and the businesses that you interact with. So thank you so much, Heather.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Well, before everybody disappears, just to let you know, on the CPRE side, please stay in touch. We've got lots of events. We've got our summer program of events now, which you might enjoy similarly. We've got talks and walks and volunteer days planned. So please let me know if you'd like to be added to the mailing list for that. Also, please follow us on social media. We're on Facebook, Instagram, Threads, and Twitter, X. And please join us, which would be wonderful. So everybody's had to email me to get the link for this talk, so you know how to contact us, and you'll be hearing from me, and I'll be offering out the recording in case you want to share that with friends and family. And our thanks again from CPRE Northumberland for attending tonight's talk. We really appreciate your support and interest. Have a good evening.
Thank you.
Brilliant.
Bye.
Good night.
Thank you, everybody. Bye for now.